welcome back to Mancinima. I hope you've had a lovely weekend. Before we get started, let's go through the old routine, the one I say at the beginning of every single one of these videos. There's a little thumbs up button down below. It's a like button. If you could hit that for me, that will really help the channel out. It just basically spreads awareness across the YouTube algorithms and lets people know that we're here. So if you could hit that for me, that would be great. Thank you so much. If you are new to the channel, and only if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. If you've subscribed before, you don't have to touch that button at all. If you do, it unsubscribes you and it kind of messes everything up. So yeah, if you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe, because we've got loads of different videos on here that you might be interested in, from movie reviews to locations to conventions and all that kind of thing. So yeah, please subscribe, I greatly appreciate that. Also hit the notification bell. The notification bell will let you know when I've done another one of these videos. And okay, so I think that's everything covered for the moment. Let's get on with today's movie review. So today's movie for you is Evil Dead Rise, the long-awaited sequel. Of course, the last Evil Dead movie we had was in 2013, which was the remake. And the original Evil Dead movie was released in 1983 in cinemas in the UK and in the US, despite it being made in 1981. Credited as being made in 1981, it was released in cinemas in 1983, so that's 40 years now. So it seems appropriate that this is the right time that we should get a brand new Evil Dead movie. Evil Dead Rise is directed by Lee Cronin, and it stars Alyssa Sutherland as Ellie, a mother of three. Those three being Danny, played by Morgan Davis, Bridget, played by Gabrielle Eccles, and the youngest daughter, Cassie, played by Nell Fisher, who does a fantastic job, by the way. And they all live in this high-rise apartment in Los Angeles. The mother is a tattooist, and she's trying to make amends that way. She's just trying to look after her family. Her family are a little bit unruly. They run around kind of fighting one another and making noise. And his son Danny, he's playing DJ music in his room really loud, and mother tells him to turn it down. They got that kind of family conflict that you would get within a single-parent family. And things are complicated a little bit further when Ellie's sister Beth turns up. Beth, played by Lily Sullivan, is on the road when she discovers that she is pregnant, and she decides to make her way back to Los Angeles to see her estranged sister. So that the two can talk, they decide to send the children out to get some pizza and other food, and they can have a kind of good girl-to-girl conversation where Beth can tell her sister that she's pregnant. However, while the children are out, on their return, there's an earthquake that strikes the city, and it creates this huge crack in the car park of the apartment building that they're staying in. Danny, being investigative, goes down into this crack in the ground and finds that there's a bank vault, and inside that bank vault is one of those famous books. Now, it's not the Book of the Dead that we've seen in the previous Evil Dead movies, but we find out during the context of this that it's actually one of the 3 books that we saw in Army of Darkness. So it's not the same book we've been used to, that we've seen in the Bruce Campbell versions, but it's one of those other 2 books, which is, so I thought was actually quite interesting. So he brings this book up, and he brings up some vinyl records, and he takes it into his bedroom, and while everybody's kind of sorting out the pizza and having discussions and that kind of business, he starts to play the records and plays it backwards, and he finds that there's an incantation by some priests. Now, if you listen carefully, you'll find that one of those priests talking is actually Bruce Campbell, so that's his cameo in the film. They play the incantation, and as you know from the previous Evil Dead movies, once you've got that book open, once you play the incantation, the Evil Dead does indeed rise, and it's not long before it takes possession of their mother Ellie. And let's just leave it there, shall we? I don't really want to go into too many spoilers from here on out, but what I'll say is that once that moment happens, the movie really does kick into gear. Up until that stage, it's a little bit of a slow burn. We kind of see the beginnings. It starts off actually in a completely different location. It starts off actually in a woodland. I'm not going to give you too much detail about that, but it starts off in a woodland before we go back in time. It says on the screen 1 day earlier. So we go back in time, so this whole thing in the apartment block takes place a day earlier. And so you've got to stay to the very end to find out how that woodland scene at the beginning wraps up at the very end of the movie. Yeah, so once we've got that woodland scene out of the way and we're introduced to the family, it is a bit of a slow burn as you get to know the family, get to know the children, get to know what their personalities are like. But it's good really, because you do get to care about them through doing that. But I did find myself sitting in the cinema thinking, alright, I know who these guys are now, how are we going to introduce the evil into the film? And then eventually the earthquake happens and you find the bank vault and you find the book, and then you think, great, okay, but it's coming now. It just seems to take a little while before it kicks into gear. It does kind of drag its heels a little bit at the beginning. That's probably my only complaint about the film really, because after that it really does kick into gear and we're back into familiar Evil Dead territory. What I loved about Evil Dead Rise is that it is unapologetically a horror movie. It really embraces the gore and the shock of horror cinema. in a way that films haven't been doing so in recent times. I mean, we've had movies such as The Babadook, Saint Maud, some of the stuff from A24. Those films are kind of embarrassed to be horror movies. They want a piece of the horror pie, but they don't really want to fully embrace themselves in the horror genre in the way that Evil Dead Rise does. And I couldn't be happier. This is an absolutely perfect horror movie. The kind of movie that years ago, if you picked up Fangoria magazine, if you read Fangoria magazine like I did and still do, flick through the pages and you look at the practical effects and you see all the gore and the blood and the squished bodies and things like that. And, you know, this movie is unapologetically, as I've said before, a horror movie. It really does love that kind of thing, and it presents it to its audience. And it's nice to see that in this day and age. I mean, we're getting too many of these elevated horror movies out there, which I get embarrassed to watch and I get ashamed to watch because I don't think they are horror movies. I think they are, like I said, social dramas that want to jump on the horror bandwagon. So to see a movie that fully loves and fully embraces the horror genre, the special effects and all, and the great acting, and the great fun, and the great excitement, and the shock, and the scares, and the jumps, and that kind of thing, Evil Dead Rise absolutely embraces all of that, and I really did enjoy this movie. I thought it was great to see this kind of a horror movie back in the cinema. I found the story of Evil Dead Rise to be good and engaging. Like I said, it does take a little while to start at the beginning, once you get to kind of know the characters, which is a good thing because you do get to embrace them and kind of feel for them in a way that most horror films tend to dash through. So it's nice that you do get that build up and you get to know the characters and the development and all that business. It is a little slow to start, but once it gets past that, once it gets onto the incantation being played, everything, basically all hell breaks loose, and that's the kind of movie that you want. I thought Alyssa Sutherland did a fantastic job as Ellie, the mother, both as the normal mother when we first get introduced with her, and we see her in her life at home surrounded by her children, and she does a job as a tattoo artist. And also once she becomes the possessed demon, she was absolutely superb when she becomes the possessed demon. And she kind of vents at her family. You see some of the shots of the trailer. There was a fantastic shot in this film where they're shooting everything through a keyhole of a door. You know, you get those little spy holes in the hotel, and the entire shot is done through that little spy hole of the door, and you see the mother going backwards and forwards, and you can hear carnage going on outside. And I thought that was very, very well done, a really nice touch. And I thought it was actually very Sam Raimi of Lee Cronin to do that. It was one of the things that I thought Sam Raimi might have done had he been directing this Evil Dead movie. So yeah, there's some nice kind of visual touches in this film. The special effects are great, the gore is great. I think there's a mixture of practical and CGI effect in the special effects. I know that it's mentioned that Lee Cronin and his crew used 6,500 gallons of blood for this film, so that's a hell of a lot of blood. The movie plays homage to all of the Evil Dead movies in the past. There's little nips here and there. There's a scene with an eyeball that's reminiscent of the movie Evil Dead 2, which is the t-shirt I've got on today. So there's a scene that's reminiscent of Evil Dead 2 in there. It also pays homage to other horror movies such as The Shining, and also, strangely, John Carpenter's The Thing. I won't tell you how, but go and see the movie and you will find out. I also thought Lily Sullivan as Beth was fantastic. She kind of takes on a Sigourney Weaver kind of role in this movie, in my opinion, in that she has to look after young Cassie in the same way that Sigourney Weaver's Ripley had to look after Newt in Aliens. Little Cassie is hiding under the cars and hiding in cupboards and things like that, while Beth is out there kind of slaying the monster, if you like. So there's that kind of dynamic going on as well, if you kind of read it that way. Everybody in this film I thought was likeable. Some of these films, when you get the single parent families, you find that some of the children can be irritating and annoying, and you kind of want them to be killed off. But by doing that kind of long establishing connection at the beginning of the movie, where you get to know the characters, you do feel for them. So when something happens to them, or whether there's a threat to them, you do feel, oh my god, no, not them. So, you know, that really does work in its favour. I thought the characterisation in this movie was fantastic. It really built up a lovely family dynamic. Now, I've seen some online criticisms of this movie already from critics themselves and from fans, saying that it doesn't adhere close enough to the previous Evil Dead movies. Now, I don't know exactly what they want from that, whether they want Bruce Campbell back. Bruce Campbell, for the moment, has said that he is retired from the role of Ash and will not return, unless Sam Raimi convinces him to. So, come on, Sam Raimi, let's get him back in the Evil Dead franchise, just for one more time, especially in a movie. But yeah, there's a lot of people that didn't like this movie because it didn't appear to appeal to some of those tropes of the previous Evil Dead films. Now, in my mind, the way that I'm looking at this movie is that, yes, it is associated with the Evil Dead genre and the Evil Dead series of movies, but I'm looking at it as the story of another book, because we've had the Necronomicon in Ash's story, and that's not, maybe fully been dealt with, but it's been dealt with a great deal. So that's interesting to actually look at another book and see how it affects another family and see what their path takes. So yeah, that's the way that I'm looking at it. And also, Evil Dead Rise, on its own merit, even if you haven't seen any of the other Evil Dead films, is a fantastic, gore-drenched, fun-loving horror movie. Like I said before, we want more of this kind of a movie at the cinema. We want to see classic horror movies that we grew up with, the kind of horror movies that made us horror fans, and not some of this apologetic horror that we're getting with, like I say, films like The Babadook and Saint Maud and things like that. We want proper, full-on horror movies, once again. And the only way we're going to do that is if you get out there and support this kind of a movie. So let's not have too much complaining about this being, not too attached to the previous Evil Dead films. Get out and watch this movie and support it, and show the studios that this is the kind of horror movie that we want, and not the kind of A24 kind of, like I said before, the apologetic kind of horror movies where they're embarrassed to be a horror movie. So yes, I thoroughly recommend that you go and see Evil Dead Rise at the cinema if you are a horror fan, if you're a true dyed-in-the-wool, kind of the Return of the Living Dead, Evil Dead, kind of George Romero kind of Fangoria-loving horror fan. Go and see this movie at the cinema and support it while you can. Horror movies don't hang around at the cinema very long, so go and give it all your love and all your support. Show the studios that we want to see more of this kind of movie rather than the kind of, like I said, the apologetic horror movies that we're getting nowadays. I hope you've enjoyed this review. Like I say, go and see Evil Dead Rise at the cinema. My rating out of 10 for it, let's give it an 8 out of 10. I mean, there's like I said, little moments where it drags. It doesn't quite reach the 9 out of 10 mark, but yeah, I'll give it an 8 out of 10 because I really did enjoy it. I would certainly watch it again. I will certainly buy it when it comes out on disc. But I do recommend you go and watch it at the cinema with a horror-loving audience, because you get that feedback from the audience when everybody jumps or everybody laughs, or everybody gets the gag that's been shown to them on the screen. So yeah, go and see this with a fun-loving horror audience full of horror fans, and it'll be a treat for you. It'll be a visual treat. It's one of my favourite movies of the year so far, especially as a horror fan. So yes, Evil Dead Rise. Go and see it at the cinema. 8 out of 10. Thank you very much for watching this video. Sorry I've rambled a little bit again, but if you could do the usual for me, like we said at the top, please like the video. It really does help the channel out. Please subscribe to the channel only if you are new to the channel. Do not subscribe again if you are already subscribed, because it unsubscribes you. It's silly, but that's the way it is. Please hit the notification bell. You'll know when I've done another one of these videos, and hopefully that'll be next week. And also, please come and have a chat with me down in the comments. Let me know what you thought about Evil Dead Rise, whether you're a die-in-the-wool kind of Evil Dead fan, or whether you're a casual horror fan, or whether you prefer the elevated horror movies. I don't mind. Just come and have a chat with me. Let me know what your opinion of that is. Next week, what have we got for you? I'm not quite sure. I know that at the end of this week I'm watching the Return of the Jedi 40th anniversary screening. I won't review that for you because the film's 40 years old. It's been at the cinema, like I said, for over 40 years. It's been on Disney Plus. You can watch it anytime you like. There's no point in me going back over that really. There's nothing new that's been added to it. It's just a 40th anniversary release for the cinema. And what else? I think Aliens is on this week as well, on Wednesday for Alien Day. So if you can get to a cinema near you that's showing the Alien movies, if you love the Alien movies, that's on from this Wednesday. As for what next week holds, at the moment I don't know. But come back in next week and we'll see what we review then. Thank you once again for watching the video, and I'll see you all soon.